Hello, sweet friends. Welcome back to the Authentic Path, where we explore what it means to live and lead authentically. And by that, I mean living and leading in alignment with your highest self, building the type of success that feels good, that fuels you, not the kind that drains you and causes you to burn out. So, today I am taking us on a deeper dive into guilt. So, in episode 9, if you are interested, I talked a lot about guilt as it relates to leadership and how we make decisions as leaders, specifically speaking to how we want to make sure we're making decisions based on compassion, but not based on guilt. And today I want to go deeper because since that episode, I've had a lot of conversation with folks about this topic. And I realize how important it is for us to heal our internalized chronic guilt. So, quickly about me, if you are new to this podcast, welcome. I'm so happy to have you here. I'm Dr. Vanessa Calderon. I'm an ER doc by training, but also come from a long indigenous line of healers. My ancestors were healers back in Mexico and Central America. And I use a lot of their ancient wisdom that has been passed down to me through my lineage, along with modern wisdom, performance science, and brain science to teach you all how to build healthy habits to support you in both living your life in a way that's in alignment, but also leading, creating businesses, and so on. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about guilt. So I call what I just said chronic guilt. And the reason why I label it as chronic guilt is because in medicine, we refer to illnesses as either acute or chronic. And the reason why we put them in those categories are for a few reasons. But one thing that I like to think about is that acute illnesses often have acute resolution, so quick resolutions. For example, you sprain your ankle or you fracture a bone, you get a cast for a couple weeks or a splint for a couple weeks. However, if you have a chronic illness like diabetes, for example, it takes longer to come on, and the solution also requires more time and attention. So it doesn't mean that it's impossible to treat diabetes. It just means that it requires more practice, more commitment, and gentle recommitment if you fall off. And the same thing for chronic guilt, because for most of us, guilt isn't something that we learned yesterday. This is something that's been sort of in our psyche from social programming for many, many years, probably our entire life. And for a lot of us, it was passed down generationally or ancestrally. And so that is going to require a little bit of practice for us to get to the other side of. And I promise you, it's 100% possible. And I'll tell you from personal experience, I came from a lot of socialized guilt, raised in a house with a lot of religion, and also passed down to me generationally. And so it took me a lot of work to get to the other side of releasing guilt for resting, guilt for saying no, guilt for creating boundaries, guilt for having more than others, guilt for the concept of maybe I wasn't being productive enough or working hard enough, all those types of things. I got to do the work to release that. And I can tell you that it feels like liberation on the other side. And that is what I want for all of you. I want you to be able to make decisions out of integrity, not based off of guilt. So if you have ever ended a day, started your day, or have gone through the day with thoughts like, oh, but I feel guilty. Oh, but I shouldn't do that. Oh, but this is how I should have done this. Any of those thoughts, or even the concept of, oh, but I feel so bad. Those are all signs of internalized chronic guilt. And this episode is for you because chronic guilt doesn't make you more caring. Chronic guilt does not mean that you care. Guilt does not mean that you care. It does not mean that you are more responsible. It actually just keeps you stuck. It keeps you resentful and it keeps you disconnected from living a life of integrity and disconnected from joy. And chronic guilt, releasing guilt doesn't make you selfish either. It just makes you more of who you really are. And what I want for all of you is to really connect back to remember who you really are, because the authentic you is what this world needs. We need more of the authentic you, not more of the programming, that society has told us we have to be. Okay, so we're going to start by talking about why we feel guilty, sort of the evolution of guilt. We're going to talk about the difference between guilt and shame today. And then I'm going to share a little bit about guilt and shame across different cultures. And we'll give you a few strategies, tactics to stop feeling guilty. All right, so let's get started. So, the evolution of guilt. So, why is it that we feel guilty? Okay, so guilt itself is not inherently bad. There is nothing wrong with feeling guilt. It actually evolved as a pro-social emotion that keeps us surviving because human beings we require to be in a tribe to survive. If you think way back to our cave people ancestors, what did they need? They needed cooperation, they needed to be in a group, they needed a tribe to survive, because if they were left alone to the elements, they likely would have gotten eaten by a bear or frozen to death. So they really needed to stay together. And if someone in the tribe caused harm to somebody else, guilt acted as a signal to repair the bond. Hey, I messed up. Let me fix this so I can stay part of the group. And we have seen in science, neuroscientists have found that when we feel guilt, part of the brain, like the anterior cingulate cortex, that part of the brain lights up. That's also the same part of the brain that's involved with empathy. So guilt, empathy can go hand in hand. So in other words, guilt was actually designed to help us stay connected. But as we fast forward now to modern life, that same emotion, when it becomes overactive, becomes incredibly toxic. And instead of nudging us to live a life of more integrity, it starts telling us that you disappointed them, you're not doing it enough, you're inadequate, you're immoral, all of those types of things. And that is not what guilt was created for. That is toxic guilt. That's guilt way over to the other side. So I'm going to teach you how to differentiate between toxic guilt and guilt that's actually supportive, that's social, that keeps us within our tribe in just a bit. But let's talk a little bit about the difference between guilt and shame first. I think this is a really important distinction. And, guilt says, I did something wrong. I did something bad. That's guilt. Shame, on the other hand, tells you, I am wrong. I am bad. And that sounds like a tiny little subtle difference, but it's incredibly life-changing. In fact, a lot of work that's been done around this can show you that guilt, again, is adaptive. It motivates us to repair and stay accountable. Shame, on the other hand, leads to self-attack. It leads to isolation. Shame creates isolation almost 100% of the time. We hide ourselves, we hide parts of ourselves because we're afraid for those parts to be seen, because we are afraid those parts are bad. Those parts are not good. And here's what I often see with a lot of folks, especially high functioning folks that I work with. They feel guilty not only for their actions or because of their good fortune, they feel guilty for reaping the rewards of their hard work. If they put in a lot of hard work and they actually do a really good job, it's hard for them to actually receive acknowledgement. They feel guilty for that, like they don't deserve to feel that acknowledgement. And why not? Why wouldn't they deserve to feel that acknowledgement? That is social conditioning. Okay, so if you hear yourself saying, I feel bad for, that's usually guilt speaking up. Okay. If you hear yourself saying things like, I should have known better, I should be further along, that might be shame. So just notice those subtle differences. So I want to make sure that you're aware of that language, because those are the types of things that we say to ourselves that keep us in these cycles. So let's move along. We're going to talk a little bit about guilt and shame across cultures, because I think it's really interesting that not all societies experience guilt and shame in the same way. So anthropologists talk about cultures that experience guilt versus cultures that experience shame. In guilt-based cultures, they typically tend to be Western cultures where we pride ourselves on individualism and morality as something being eternal. So if you break a rule, you feel bad inside. Shame-based cultures are usually more collective-based cultures where we still feel responsible to part of a larger community or a larger family. So this is sometimes seen in a lot of Eastern cultures where behavior is regulated based on the way the community perceives you. So you dishonor your family, you dishonor your community, and then you feel the shame that comes from being seen as dishonoring your family. Every culture contains both guilt and shame. They all just get expressed a little bit differently. Now, guilt, sadly, is not distributed equally. We have some folks that feel tremendously more guilty than other folks. And sometimes, I was not raised Catholic, but I am Latina. So I know a lot of Catholics. And it's kind of like a joke I hear often with a lot of my Catholic clients too, where they say, I have Catholic guilt. My Jewish clients, same thing. I have Jewish guilt. And so guilt could be something that you were taught based on your religious upbringings or cultural upbringings. But there are a lot of other reasons why you may have been socialized to feel more guilt. There's the gender socialization. So from a young age, we know women or girls are taught to be nice, to avoid conflict, to care for others. And they internalize doing something wrong if they're not being nice, if they're doing something wrong, if they're not always thinking about somebody else before they think about themselves. They internalize that as feeling guilty, like they are doing something wrong. Boys, meanwhile, are often taught to suppress vulnerability, which can lead to externalized guilt. So they might feel guilty, but instead of showing that guilt or saying they feel guilty, they'll say it as, they feel angry, or they'll show up as being defensive. And then again, I talked about religious and moral upbringing in the beginning with the Catholic and Jewish examples, but many religious traditions teach guilt as sort of this moral compass. If you are good, if you obey, you are good. If you are bad and you disobey, you should feel guilty because you are doing something wrong or immoral. And over time, that conditioning can create deep unconscious associations between worth and obedience. Like you are only worthy, you are only good if you are also being obedient. That is something that I want you guys all just to examine within yourselves. Is that something that you hold on to? Because many people associate that with also being perfect. So perfect means I'm being moral and being good, and anything perceived as imperfect is bad or immoral. I used to have a client who was raised, she would joke and say, oh man, I have both the Catholic guilt and Jewish guilt, because she had a parent that was Catholic, a parent that was Jewish. And when we did a lot of her just coming home to herself work, a lot of her authenticity work, we had to shed a lot of her habits around perfectionism. And one of the things she kept noticing is how she would always go to, oh, but that's just bad. Oh, but that's just good. It was so black and white in her head. Good meant perfect, bad meant imperfect, bad meant immoral. So imperfect meant immoral. And it was really beautiful healing work she got to do when she realized, wow, look at all the stuff I made it. I look at everything I've learned and what I made it mean, and how she got to release that and really decide upon herself what it means to be good, what it means to be in integrity. So again, super important to identify, because it can make it really hard to live and to lead authentically when you are also trying to be perfect all the time, because perfection is, as we all know, a fallacy. It's impossible, because perfection itself is not even authentic. Perfection is another mask we wear. It's an inauthentic mask we wear when we're actually afraid to be seen for who we really are. There's this quote I heard, I can't remember who said it, and I don't even remember where I heard it, but I love it because I think it speaks to perfection perfectly. Perfectionism is shame dressed in gold. Perfectionism is shame dressed in gold, and I believe that. I think the more perfect we try to show up, the more insecure we really are inside, the more we're really afraid to be seen for who we really are, because we believe who we really are is not good enough, and that's why we try so hard to show up as perfect. There's also, of course, cultural and family conditioning. So I want you to think about your adult figures in your life and what you saw in them, what was taught to you in terms of how you showed love. Because there's in many cultural and family conditioning around guilt, there are powerful links between love and guilt. Like the more guilt you feel, that the more that it means you love somebody. But again, I'm going to say this again, guilt does not mean caring, and guilt does not mean love. Guilt, guilt means in Spanish, the word is translated as culpa, culpable, like you are at fault. You are at fault, culpable, or that you are pecando, you are sinning. And that's really important, because guilt is a moral stamp. It's a moral stamp. We are saying you are being immoral. That's what the word guilt actually means. So again, think about the adult figures that raised you and what did you learn from them in terms of guilt? I had another client that was so fascinating. She told me once how, as we were doing this work for her and she was undoing all her own chronic guilt, she told me how she realized one weekend after we started working together that she heard herself say to her son, you have to put sunblock on because you're going to make me feel bad if you get sunburnt. And then she was like, whoa, you are going to make me feel bad. You are going to make me feel guilty if you get sunburnt. Like it was her son's fault for her to have that guilt, which was fascinating and a lot of work she got to undo. Now, listen, quick caveat. This isn't to make any parents listening feel guilty about anything, feel bad about anything that they're teaching their kids, because we do the best we can with our kids. And no doubt our kids are going to grow up and have their own stuff to work through. That's part of being human. That's part of the human condition. So we do the best we can. But I'm just sharing an example with you. Okay. And then lastly, some other folks that sort of inherit a little bit more guilt than others are empaths. Empaths, trauma survivors, even high achievers sometimes often internalize guilt as a form of control. And this was a big one for me, coming from experiencing that. I guess I kind of fit all three of these. I came from experiencing some childhood trauma, plus I also identify as a high achiever and I'm incredibly empathic. And guilt for me was a way for me to think that I could fix things. If it is my fault, then I can fix it. And that is so fascinating. I believed, so I felt guilty for almost everything. World hunger made me feel guilty. I like just assuming that it's my fault that, there's a large part of the population that doesn't have that's experiencing food insecurity, when clearly that is not my fault, but those are the kind of things that I internalized. This is known as a trauma response, as the fawn response. Now, we know about fight or flight as trauma responses. Some of you might even know as freeze as the trauma response. Fawn is one of the fourth trauma responses. It's sort of a lesser known trauma response, also known as people pleasing. The fawn response is where we can fawn to protect ourselves, or we can try to please others, to help others, to protect ourselves. And this is sort of where this guilt response falls into place. So if you grew up in a place where safety depended on keeping other people happy, making sure your parents weren't fighting or arguing, guilt may have become a way for you to stay safe. Okay, I'm going to go on here. And again, I'm going to say this one more time. Guilt is not the same as caring. Guilt is not the same as compassion. Compassion is caring. Guilt says I did something wrong. Compassion says I care about you and I want to act from love. That is compassion. Compassion is an intentional feeling. I choose to feel compassion because I'm a compassionate person. I care for others. Guilt is an unintentional feeling. So majority of the guilt that we experience is unintentional. It's not coming because we broke a moral rule or we're acting out of integrity. The majority of the guilt that we feel comes from socialized guilt. I'm going to teach you how to tell the difference in just a second. But when you are noticing that you are feeling something that's an unintentional feeling, remember the cognitive thought model, thoughts create your feelings drive your actions create your results in the world. An unintentional feeling like guilt is always going to create unintentional actions, which will create unintentional results. So, for example, when you are coming from guilt, when you parent from guilt, you're making leadership decisions based from guilt, you're making decisions in your life based from guilt, you are essentially programming your mind to go into survival mode. Your nervous system is in survival mode, anxious, self-critical, trying to prove yourself. Compassion, on the other hand, is thoughtful, it's caring, it's love in action. That's how I think about compassion. Compassion is putting our caring love, our empathy into action. It's an intentional feeling that drives us to take intentional actions. And I see this all the times in folks who are mission driven. I work with a lot of physicians and also other mission driven leaders and entrepreneurs, and they tend to confuse care, like I care for them, compassion, I feel compassion, with carrying everybody's guilt and carrying their burden. Those two things are not the same. All right, so I'm going to spend the rest of this episode talking about how to release chronic guilt, how to heal from chronic guilt, how to stop that cycle. So the first thing to know is there are two types of guilt that we experience, okay? There's what I call rational guilt. This is that guilt that we are meant to feel that says we are going against our own moral compass. This is rational guilt. We are going against our own moral compass. We are out of integrity. And then there's the second type of guilt, toxic guilt, or I label irrational guilt. Irrational guilt is again the learned response. It's the learned response that we were socialized with, that we learned from whatever adult figures in the world and society around us, that's usually associated with the word should or feeling bad and all these rules that are really not our own rules. We didn't make up the rules, but we were taught those rules and we never questioned them. So depending again on how you were raised or what was modeled to you, you might experience a tremendous amount of irrational guilt. Now, irrational guilt comes from three different reasons. Number one, it's this sort of sense of over responsibility. For example, you believe you are responsible for the feelings of somebody else. What's a good example of that? I'll give you one for me. So before becoming a physician, I was a social justice activist and I worked a lot on healthcare access and poverty elimination work. And when I would eat at a fancy restaurant, I would feel tremendously guilty. Like I don't deserve to eat there. I shouldn't be eating there. Like if I didn't eat there, that would solve the world hunger problem. Clearly, those two things are irrational. That's not eating that meal is not in turn going to solve the problem of world hunger. So that's an irrational form of guilt. So that's over responsibility. Another example is you are an adult, you have a friend that's another adult, you guys have both decided to do something together, that person is stuck in traffic and can't make it there and they're stuck in traffic and now you feel guilty because that person is running late, or you feel bad because that person is going to miss appetizers or d'oeuvres or whatever, and you are feeling that guilt. That is irrational guilt. That's a sense of over responsibility. The other type of irrational guilt can come from underlying anxiety. This is really important. This is fear-based guilt that where you have thoughts like they might get mad at me or I'm going to disappoint them if I do a certain thing. So that's underlying anxiety. So it's a fear-based type of guilt. So if you are noticing that you're feeling guilty or feeling bad because you're afraid someone's going to get mad at you, that's a form of irrational guilt. And then the third is this sort of like little kid belief that you can only be happy if they're happy. So if you guys think about kids, often kids are very egocentric, where they believe it's their responsibility to make their parents happy. And they don't believe like they can be happy unless their parents are happy. That is the same thing that translates into adults, where it's sort of this little kid belief that I feel so guilty unless I know for sure that they are okay, that they are happy. Then I can feel happy. Okay. Irrational guilt comes from irrational thinking. Notice all those examples I gave you, especially about consequences, irrational thinking about consequences. And irrational guilt is going to linger in the face of facts. So this is a really good one. Let me give you an example. I work with a lot of professional women who are bosses, man. They're incredible. They're amazing at the work that they do. They tend to work a lot. And when they go through the stage of having young kids and they're trying to figure out how to be a parent and also how to work and how to do both, then they have to do their own work of like all the societal expectations of being a mother and having to be fully present for it. They start feeling a tremendous amount of mom guilt. And then they feel guilty when they're at work. They feel guilty when they're at home because they're not working. And I remember I had a client once who was doing her best to try to manage her time and wanted and had no time for herself ever. So finally, she's like, okay, it's been like 3 or 4 months. I haven't had 1 or 2 hours to myself. I really want to spend some time to myself this weekend. And so she looked at her calendar and she realized she had a couple hours on Saturday where she wasn't going to be working and she could take 2 hours to go to the spa. So she said, I want to go to the spa this weekend, but I feel so guilty because I work so much that when I'm not working, I want to be with my kids. And then she realized, oh, her kids had a birthday party that weekend. So she's like, okay, I'll go to the spa. But even though her kids had a birthday party, even though her significant other said, go to the spa, I'll take care of the kids, she still felt tremendously guilty. She went to the spa anyway. And while she was there, she was doing her best, but she couldn't be fully present because she felt guilty. And when she got home, her kids were having this great time telling her about all the fun that they had. Their dad even took them to get extra ice cream. And even though her kids had a great time, the facts, her kids had a great time, they're telling her she still felt guilty. That is an example of irrational guilt where it lingers even in the face of facts. Okay, so there's rational guilt. We are going against our own moral code. We are out of integrity. And then there's everything else, irrational guilt. If you notice, if you think back on the last time you felt guilty, I want you to tell me, like, label it rational or irrational guilt. And I'll tell you right now, my sense is 99% of you have experienced irrational guilt because most of us, we're good people. We're following a moral code. We are in integrity. And that's how we know that most of the guilt we're experiencing is actually conditioned upon us. It's not because we actually believe it to be true, but we've never questioned it. Okay, so I'm going to give you a couple tactics now so that you can start undoing your own sense of chronic guilt. I really want you to heal from this because the more you can heal from this, the more you can live a life of intention, aligned with who you really are, an authentic life. Okay, so the first thing I want you to do is I want you to notice next time you think something like, I feel bad or I should be doing this. As soon as you notice that, just look out for it. Notice, okay? Step one, noting. I notice that I'm shoulding on myself, or I notice that I'm feeling guilty. Okay? Notice. When you notice, then you can ask yourself, am I feeling guilty because I care about something, or is it because I'm afraid or I'm uncomfortable? Who taught me this? Ask yourself, like, where did I learn this? Am I doing this because of societal expectations? Where did I learn this? Was this modeled to me? And then I want you to label the guilt as rational or irrational. Label it as rational and or irrational. Is this rational guilt? Am I out of my moral code? You can ask yourself, am I out of integrity? Am I doing something immoral? Because our brains love clarity, and calling something what it is helps put some distance between your core self, your authentic self, your inner sage, and your thinking brain. It helps you create distance between those things. And sometimes that's all you need. Sometimes that clarity dissolves all the confusion, and that's all you need. Once you can label it, you're like, okay, clearly I'm okay. I don't need to feel guilty for this. It feels uncomfortable, but I don't have to name it guilt. And then you can redefine compassion for compassion. Because if you decide that actually, I feel guilty because I realize, I'll give you an example. I had a physician leader that I was working with who was creating a schedule for her site, for her department. And there was a person in her department that didn't want to work the middle of the day shifts because she was a young mom and she wanted to be home to pick up all her kids, her kids from school and help with homework, all those types of things. And she used to be a young mom. She knew what that felt like. And so she felt a tremendous amount of guilt when she had to put her on the schedule. And we had to coach around that because she realized, okay, ideally, nobody would have to work that shift because all the parents on the schedule don't want to work that shift. And also, we have a schedule to cover. We have to cover every shift. It was an emergency department. We have to cover 24 hours of coverage. And so it's not fair to give everybody else extra work because she wants to be home with her kids. So she felt the guilt and realized, I actually just really care about her. I feel compassion for her. I get it. I understand. I was a young mom once too. And when she was able to label that, she was able to be more creative about it. She was able to come and say, listen, I totally get it. I'm so sorry. I was a young mom too. I get that you want to be home, but we also have the schedule that we have to create. And this is the coverage that we need. Do you have any suggestions of how we can make the schedule fair if we don't give you those shifts? And that person was willing to work extra night shifts and she was willing to work extra mornings on the weekends. And so the group decided that that was fair. Now, some people are not going to be that reasonable. Some people are going to still push against that and say, no, I just want this off. And if you are a leader listening to this, then you get to do what the best thing is for the entire site, not just for one person. And you never want to hold yourself hostage to just one person who's difficult. You want to make sure that part of being a leader is making difficult decisions. But when you can define compassion for compassion, that is going to be really supportive for you. It might open up a way for you to be more creative and more innovative. And lastly, I want you to get super clear on your values because once you start getting really clear on your values and your integrity, you're going to start to notice that most of the guilt you experience is irrational because you are a person of integrity. You're a person that's likely does the right thing, even when nobody is watching, highly integral person. That's really important to know because you don't want to confuse irrational guilt with being out of integrity. And then the last one I will say is this: if you actually are doing something, you feel guilty and you are noticing like, okay, I did mess up. I was out of integrity. That is totally fine. That's the whole purpose of guilt. It's normal. What you want to do when that happens is notice it and then repair it. I realized I made a mistake. Here's what I'm going to do to make it right. That is integrity in action. That's guilt without self-absorption. That is beautiful. That is what we want. We want to repair. We don't want to ruminate because ruminate creates chronic guilt. There's no need to stay in rumination. Rumination is thinking about the past. You're no longer in the present moment. You are no longer taking action that's in integrity. You're back into self-absorption. And that's not who you are. That's not who you want to be. Okay, so we covered a lot of stuff today. We talked about the difference between rational guilt and irrational guilt. I talked about where guilt comes from, why some of us have been conditioned to feel it more than others. And I want to remind you that because most of this irrational guilt is chronic, we've been experiencing it, most of us all of our lives, and some of us from other past it's been passed down to us for hundreds and hundreds of generations. It takes a little bit more time, a little bit more practice to get to the other side of it. But it is 100% possible. I promise you. I know I am an example of it. I was able to overcome it. I am now able to show up every day and notice when I'm feeling guilty, because I still feel irrational guilt. Even though I've done my work, I still feel it sometimes, but I can label it for what it is. And I don't get stuck in it and I don't take actions from it. I can shift and I can shift a little bit faster. That's powerful. That's liberation. That's what I want for all of you. All right, sweet friends, it is such a gift to be here with you. I want to remind you of three things. Number one, you are worthy of doing this work. You deserve to be free of all of this socialization that's been programmed into you. You deserve to be free from that. Number two, I have a link inside of the show notes. It's the very first link where you can communicate with me directly. So if there's something that you really liked about this episode, please leave a rating and a review. You can leave that as a review, but also communicate with me directly. If there's something that you want me to cover, to discuss, you can put that in, click that link and you can chat with me directly. I read all of those messages and I'll reply back to you. Let me know what it is that you want me to cover, what a podcast episode you want me to create for you. And if you want help doing this work for yourself so you can live a life of fulfillment, alignment, of inner peace, of true success that is aligned with who you are, with your authentic self, without burnout, that is the work I do with my clients. So you can create a consult. You can schedule a consult. The link to do that is also in the show notes. All right, sweet friends, I will see you next week. Adios.